All right, welcome back to the pod, Writer's Block, episode 4. Today I am joined in the studio. I've been going solo the last couple weeks with KOB for sports anchor and reporter Lauren Green. Lauren, thanks for coming on today.
Of course, Sean. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
And over the weekend, we're recording on a Monday, we had UNM football's first ever spring game under head coach Bronco Mendenhall. Not their first ever spring game. That's silly. But their first under Bronco Mendenhall. It's a beautiful day. 78, I think, was the high, I want to say.
Weather was perfect, yeah.
Weather was perfect. The listed attendance was like 12,000, excuse me, not 12,000, 1,250 in the stand, which is a very good spring ball number for New Mexico in particular. Seemed like there was a lot of interest. I saw a ton of alumni. Jarek Reed was back. Saw some people that will be alumni. Chikoi Krosky-Merritt was there.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yes, it's good to see Bill. But yeah, I mean, it was a vastly different vibe from last year. You covered last year's spring game, right?
I actually was not at last year's spring game. Yeah, so I've just because I just started sports covering teams in technically last August, but I wasn't at last year's spring game. But I do know how things are a lot different. So
yeah, significantly different. Last year's was a more of like a spring showcase type deal. It was on a Monday night, which I didn't hate at the time. I thought that was interesting. Kind of a unique way to mix it up. But Saturday was, I mean, the real deal, the regular deal. Ones on ones offense, twos on twos offense, defense, all that. Final score, Cherry, the offense 42, White 0. That sounds like a blowout. It really was not that at all. Just because of the fact there wasn't any unique wrinkles for the defense to score outside of like a scoop and score or a pick six. Lauren, I'm curious. I mean, what were your thoughts on the spring game? What you saw?
yeah, I think it was, we haven't been able to see too much at practice and things of that sort. I think last Tuesday was when we got to see probably the most at practice, at least in my opinion, when I was there with you. I think in the spring game, we kind of just got to see players come out with adrenaline of competing in front of fans and kind of just trying to learn this new process of working under this new coaching staff and trying to just, work out the wrinkles in different areas. So nothing specifically stood out to me, but it was just kind of like it's a new era. So there's a lot to work through, I think, for these players.
Exactly. And new era, I mean, this is the perfect way to sum it up. And, like you said, not that much different from what we kind of saw last week. Last week in practice was more or less the first time we had really seen 11 on 11 or a significant amount of it. The one thing that kind of stood out to me in a lot of ways was that during practice, Devin Dampier was pretty much taking all the reps out of a quarterback room with Justin Holiday as the backup. DC Tapscott was the third string. He transferred out last week. So really that room is just Devin, Justin Holiday, and Isaiah Chavez at the moment. And the exact same thing happened in the spring game. I think Devin took all but 2 snaps. He seemed to embrace that, but I was curious what you saw out of Devin in terms of what he did on the field and what he said after.
Yeah, I think Devin, seeing what he was able to do kind of late last season and kind of what he came into as a player, but then what he's really come into with a new coaching staff and kind of embracing a lot of change, but he's so positive. I think, speaking with him after practice when we're able to speak with him, or even when we spoke with him after the game, he's a really positive guy, and I think he's embracing this leadership role. But I think we kind of mentioned this a little bit at the spring game, but he does have all these reps. So he's kind of having to step into this role of leadership no matter what's going on, because that's just, he's kind of getting pushed into that. But I think he's transitioning to that really great. I think all the players respond really well to it. And yeah, he's just a really positive guy, and I think that's great to have at the quarterback position. Yeah,
and for me, like going into this spring, I wouldn't say it was like a concern, so to speak, how he would kind of handle that role, because I mean, down the stretch last year, I mean that start really on from that Wyoming game. I mean, it was flip flopping with Dylan Hopkins, the whole deal. I mean, he's playing a lot of snaps. He was key in that Fresno State game, getting the job done there. He was very good in the Utah State game as well. I wasn't worried that he wouldn't be able to take on this role, but it was kind of a question, and he's kind of passed that with flying colors so far, in my opinion. On the field, the big differences I'm seeing, he's a little bit more of a refined passer. In general, last spring he was not a loose cannon, but I mean he still had to work things out. He did have some long throws. He's more prone to kind of miss guys long, from what I've seen. I'm curious to see how he develops as like a middle of the field passer. I don't think I've seen enough there. Although he's been fine in that regard from everything I've seen, and that's just kind of that at the moment. But he keyed an offense that did put up 42 points. One thing that stands out to me about the offense is the running back room. Eli Sanders, an Iowa State transfer, Javen Jacobs, an Arizona State transfer, and Andrew Henry, who's a returner from last season as well. Not an incredibly deep running back room beyond those three options, but that's three really good options. I asked Bronco on Saturday, has anybody kind of put themselves ahead? And it doesn't really look like that at all. What's kind of your read on the running back room to this point?
I think after week 1 is when I spoke to Javen Jacobs, who came from Arizona State. You know, it's nice. His family's still close, so I think it was a good fit for him, is what he mentioned, coming over here to Albuquerque. He's not too far, but I think, again, it's just so fresh. You have transfers coming in, so everything's going to be new for them. Then you have just a whole new coaching staff who's trying to get even the returners to kind of just mesh with this. And I think it's just a lot of people trying to find their way, and I think that's what the running backs room looks like as well when I spoke to Javen. But speaking with him week 1, and even to all of the players like throughout the weeks, everyone will bring up things that, we might need to work on this and that, but no one ever has kind of a negative body language when discussing that. I think the morale of players, whether it is the running back room people I've spoken with or just other players I speak with, everyone seems to be focused, and they kind of have the same mindset when it comes to how they're approaching spring ball and just kind of a lot of different changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned I haven't talked to Javen Jacobs yet, honestly, and that's partially that's part of we just don't have the access that we did last year in some ways.
Right.
I just haven't been able to get to him yet. But I mean, I can basically say the exact same thing about it, and talking to like Eli Sanders and all that. A guy transfer coming in, wanted a different opportunity, wanted to do something different at a different school. And he's just kind of had that focus, and just the word he's thrown around, that Broncos thrown around too, is position mastery, and they're really keyed in there on the field. Sanders to me is more of like a freelancing back in some ways. I think the way Devin put it is that like he'll get you the first, like if you just let him go and all that. Javen Jacobs, I mean, I've seen him out wide a bit more too. Devin kind of pinpointed him as the best route running and pass catching back. And then Andrew Henry, I mean, I think he's the closest thing you kind of have right now to a 3-down back in that kind of sense. Really good burst still. He's recovered from that high ankle sprain from last season, and I mean, he can be a bit of a bruiser. I think we saw that in one of the goal line situations on Saturday as well. But on that note as well, they were going up against a defense that is largely in flux. Lost some key pieces from last season in terms of linebacker Alec Marenko. He's in the transfer portal right now. Sire Riley, he medically retired from the game. Dante Martin and Zach Morris, the two key corners there, they're all gone. Dante ran out of eligibility. Zach is now at San Diego State. What impressions did you get of the defense so far, and what impressions has the defense kind of left on you this spring in general? Yeah,
I think going back to, I can never, when I'm thinking back of, the impressions things, it's not many things that I'm seeing on the field. It's more directly when I'm speaking to players, because what's going on at practice from what we have been able to see or at the spring game, again, we have limited access this year. But again, speaking to some of the defense that I have spoken to, I think I want to bring it back to just this whole theme of what Broncos kind of been trying to teach or instill in this team. And I think it's just everything that they've told me is just, it's very meticulous. It's very everything. I'm going to use it as an example, but even tie your shoes. No one's told me that, but there's been little things of like, even your lockers have to be a certain, like, there are so many different ways this program has changed. And I think, again, looking at things on the field, I can kind of make, I can make assumptions or look at things, but I'm taking what I'm seeing and what the players are telling me and how they're building their different mindset, I think, and working on these like small things to really base on that, because I can't really speak specifically on defense, but
yeah, for me, the defense on Saturday, honestly, like I liked what I saw more from the front seven in a way. It just seems like, and this may be a coaching thing, this may just be just having more guys that can kind of do this in particular. Last year, UNM was, frankly, a really bad pass rushing team. They're one of the worst in the country. by just about every single metric. I talked to defensive end Gabe Lopez, and he brought it up on Saturday. He said, we just did not have a lot of sacks last year. We were bottom tier in the country. He's exactly correct. I think it's a little bit of they have kind of the guys that are maybe more suited to doing that right now and kind of excelling at that. I liked what I saw from that in that regard on Saturday. It wasn't a dominating performance. It was a 42-0 spring game in favor of the offense, but not quite a fair fight in terms of score. But at the same time, I think there's some glimmers there. That's what I'm really curious to see in this last week of spring practice and going into the fall, how that kind of develops. They have a guy, Jan Jorgensen, who I believe is still second all-time in the Mountain West history in terms of career sacks, like 20.5. I mean, he's coaching that group. And I talked to Lopez, and I mean, rave reviews from him. They kind of a night and day difference in terms of coaching that edge spot as well. In terms of depth and all that, I want to say, in my opinion, the deepest position on the field or on the team right now is the wide receivers.
Sure.
That shined the most on Saturday was Nick Trujillo, 2 touchdowns. One of them was like the first possession. It was like a 3rd and 14, 3rd and 15 situation. Devin just backed up, and Trujillo was all the way back, beat his man, and just quick TD to kind of light things up a little bit. They had another long TD that he kind of, I don't remember if he juked Noah Avinger, but he did beat out Noah Avinger. I don't know if he juked him, but he did beat him out during the game. I'm just curious your thoughts on that position group to this point, and also Trujillo in general, the kind of growth he's had from last year's freshman season.
No, yeah, I was going to agree. I think that is when we do look at all these positions, it's like I have a bunch of question marks for all these, or I don't know what to say about that. But the wide receivers is a room where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe this is something that can really work well with this offense. But I think also looking at the offense as a whole, I think you've mentioned this even on a previous podcast you did, just talking, but also this offense isn't, I think, something that's going to be something specific, I guess, is the goal that other teams are going to be able to know, like, oh, they run something like this, so that's how we can approach playing New Mexico. But it's something that's kind of going to take some time to build on, of course, but also it's going to be something that's really hyper-specific to UNM and very kind of incognito, I think, for everyone who's associated with the program. But I think that's something you had kind of touched on a little bit previously, right?
Yeah, and that's really all Bronco in a lot of ways. I mean, I remember during his opening press conference, and he said it. I couldn't even give you a number, but he said it a lot since. We want our offense and defense to be things that you can't name.
Right.
If you name it, if the offense is a triple option, like I remember last season before UNM played UNLV, talking with former defensive coordinator Troy Reffett, who I always loved talking to Troy. Tremendous football mind. Talking to Troy about UNLV, they run the go-go, which is a really unique form of the option. And I was asking, hey, Coach Reffett, how are you going to stop this? And he said, not too much of a wrinkle here. I mean, it's a triple option. I've been coaching for 30 years. I've seen the triple option. That being said, it didn't go all that well for UNM in terms of stopping the triple option. But
they could detect it. They knew.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
And Bronco, his philosophy is we want to be things that you can't name, because if you can name it, you can stop it. And that's certainly in play on the offense and defense as well. And you frankly just don't hear a lot of football coaches talk like that. And you don't hear a lot of football coaches talk like Bronco Mendenhall. We're, 4 weeks in to spring ball, 5 weeks total. This is the 5th week. You've done the press conferences. You have, you've been to a lot of practices as well. I'm just curious. At this point too, outside of the spring game and everything, what are your impressions of Bronco Mendenhall so far?
Right. I think he approaches this very professionally. You can tell he has a love for this game for sure. And he, and coming into a brand new program, taking the time that he did, I think he's trying to make sure, I think he touched on in one of our press conferences, he wants to make sure that, he's building trust with his players, but also just building this team. And I guess if not everyone we can't see that, or, the public fully sees that, it's something that he thinks is what's best with the team. But even speaking with him, we don't get too much, but the words that I think I've gotten every single week that we have been able to speak with Coach Mendenhall, he brings up the willingness of players. He might mention, A, B, and C isn't working just right now, but he does bring up the willingness of players. And I think that's something I mentioned speaking with all of them. I've never felt negative body language after a practice, even after they had a scrimmage one Saturday. We spoke to them. I've never, they might be tired and stuff, but everything seems the morale is what I'm going to go back to. they're all focused. I think they like how strict things are in this new program and how things are going. And I think it's a good, these new regimens that they're doing, I think works for a lot of the players. And the ones who it doesn't, they've probably hit the portal. But also consistency was something that Coach Mendenhall brought up after the spring game. That was a huge word. I think I asked, in building consistency, the obvious answer, is going to be reps and things of that sort. But again, I think Bronco's learning all of these players. He's new with all of them. And I think he's just trying to take that all in, because you can tell he's so hyper-focused that what we get is just, an understanding of, okay, he's working on things, but he's very hyper-focused. I think that's like the biggest thing I could take from him.
Yeah, I mean, notably hyper-focused. I remember I included in the long feature I wrote about him, and got put out in February, I think. And all that, one of the main stories about him is that when he started his coaching career, he was a GA at Oregon State. And he was basically living in the football office, and he started the season in August, and he came out in November, basically, and he didn't know where his car was, and it was parked in the exact same spot, covered in leaves and parking tickets and all that. So that focus is there, and you always hear, the term, this coach is a CEO type, or he wants to be more of a, like Ryan Day at Ohio State is going to be more of a CEO type guy this year. He's not going to be messing around with the offense that much. He's going to be more of a CEO guy. Braga to me is just absolutely the CEO type in a lot of ways,
for sure.
And that just goes in, his approach overall, what we know about his approach, and also just the way he speaks about things in general. You'll hear, you will hear a lot of coaches around this time of year say after a practice, the defense won the day or the offense won the day. And I remember asking Bronco about that, does that even matter to you? And he's like, no, I mean, we're not going to be outcome based at this point. We're trying to actually avoid that. That's the lazy thing to kind of drift to. That's the natural thing to drift to, but we want to avoid that. And you just don't hear a lot of coaches speak like that.
No, and I think we got a taste of that even in his opening press conference when he was first introduced by New Mexico Athletic Director Eddie Nunez. What was that, a couple months ago? But I think in his speech, he had mentioned, he's like, yeah, I wish I could, he's like, I love talking to everyone, but I kind of want to just get to the office and just start working now. And I think after hearing that, I was like, okay, he has a very calm demeanor, but he's trying to get after football. I mean, that's why he's come back to it, right? He has a pure love for it, and I think that shows in a lot of ways.
Exactly, yeah, I completely agree. I'll flip it back to the spring game a little bit. Was there anything at all that kind of surprised you during the spring game?
That surprised me? I think not in the game specifically. I think you kind of touched on talking about Devin. I think looking at how he has a run game, but also needs to work on his long passes and things like that. But I think that's just, he does have that strength in being able to be a runner at that area. And then that might also come with just developing, if we get other guys in on the offense, if that changes how he does approach his game too. But other than that, no, I don't think anything really stood out to me. I think the weather on a Saturday permitted a pretty good crowd. And I think a lot of people, whether they're just anxious to get back to, being really big fans of Lobo football, I think a lot of people are also just curious too, because of how limited maybe they're not used to seeing a lot of spring, or they're used to seeing more spring ball. So I think there's a lot of curious fans. I think there was a lot of fans just out there just because they're loyal Lobo fans too. But no, nothing exactly stood out. But
yeah, and I've touched on this on the podcast. The last podcast I did kind of previewed the spring game, and that was the point I mentioned, how many people are going to show up. I made the point to mention it after I made the point to mention on the last podcast. I accidentally started a firestorm on Twitter during the Utah State game because I took a picture of the stands, and it wasn't meant to be malicious or anything. Just, there's just not a lot of people here. And but that to me was a barometer of the interest in the program at that point. I thought Saturday the attendance was a good barometer of the interest in the program. I wouldn't say it was totally surprising because I think we've seen kind of a renewed interest. But yeah, I think for me during the spring game, what surprised me was generally I can't speak for them. I don't know how they're looking at that room entirely because, I mean, we've asked about it. We haven't gotten a ton back from Bronco Mendenhall to this point. But just generally how that offensive front looked. Baraka Beckett, Wallace Unamba, Richard Pierce, Mackenzie Agnello, Juwan Singletary. That is all transfers, all 5 on the first team offensive line. All transfers, and it looked pretty cohesive. It looked pretty good in kind of the first extended time that we were able to watch them in a live situation, which we just really until Saturday have not been able to do. It looked solid. That was my major question going into the spring game. Going into the spring in general. On that note, I was curious, what questions did you kind of have going into the spring and how have they maybe been answered or what has not been answered at this point?
I think the biggest thing for me right now, because this is just something that every college or every reporter like us across the country is curious about, is just the transfer portal. It's the magic words, right? The magic phrase. The portal opened up last week and then it closes on April 30th? On the 30th. It'll be interesting to see. We'd spoken with Bronco a little bit on the process of how big NIL is. He's like, I don't want to give too much away, but I'm excited on kind of what we're doing in that realm. I think my biggest question that's still unanswered is just, are we going to see just a big name come to, not big name, but just someone who can fill a really big position, who maybe has the star power that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt had? Are we missing a big hitter like that on the offense, or someone like that defensively as well? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that? Because that's just, we know how big of a loss that was for Bill to leave. But I know I don't know how you're feeling about that. But
yeah, and Bill's such a weird example to me in some ways because, like, and I've written about this, I've made this point on other podcasts, on other shows, and all that. Like, when they broke spring practice last year, I thought they were basically set at running back. I thought it was a deep room. There wasn't a true kind of bell cow that former offensive coordinator was looking at. They hadn't found it yet, I should say. But you had options. I thought it was probably going to be Andrew Henry in the end. But I was curious to see that competition play out into fall camp. And it was like July when I saw Alabama State running back Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is transferring to New Mexico. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I didn't think he was going to, I didn't think they were going to add another running back. And, I didn't think they were going to add another running back. And, his numbers were fine at Alabama State. They were not, jaw-dropping, and it's not a great conference that he was playing in, the SWAC. But first week he showed up. I mean, literally, I think it was the first possession that he took on. He broke a long run. It's like, okay, this guy can run, and by the end of that first week, it's apparent he'd be the guy. I haven't quite seen that flash out of anybody yet. I do think they're going to be adding more on defense in the portal. At least that's what they look like they're going to be adding. I think they will try and end up and add another quarterback. They do have Soljay Maeva-Peters coming in from BYU. I'm assuming he's going to play quarterback. Maybe he does factor into the running back situation because he was switched over there, but I'm assuming he's going to play quarterback. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like, is there somebody, it's not that complicated, right? We watch practice and somebody who can do it absolutely flashes and it shows.
Right.
And we've seen a lot of good stuff. We haven't quite seen that yet with the access that we've had.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, I think they're going to want to add more defensive players. They do have some scholarships open right now. But yeah. In terms of the roster, I mean, do you have any spots in particular that you think they need to add in particular?
I think it does just go back to maybe the running back room. I mean, we talked about how the wide receiver room, I think that's a spot that could be good and is in a good area to develop. But I think specifically that running back room, I want to be able to see what could happen with Devin performing with someone that has a really big footprint in that spot, or could leave a really big footprint for New Mexico in that spot. I think that area, I mean, I don't know. We kind of just talked about it with Bill gone. But again, you mentioned he was kind of I say unicorn, but sometimes, players transfer and come in and they have that breakout year that they've been either working towards and it just finally hits, or different things. But it'd be interesting to see if we're able to take someone from the portal that is able to have that year, because maybe there is someone on the team that we just haven't been able to see yet. And maybe that could happen. And it's so early. It's spring right now. It's hard to make decipher what could possibly happen when it's brand new program and it's just, a couple weeks into it. So
Exactly, yeah, and I agree. And I think, probably in terms of we haven't quite seen it, but it is there. I think that person's probably on the defense right now. We just haven't quite seen it in some ways. Yeah, I'm with you on the running backs too. I'm curious about, I think they're in a very good spot. I do think they need to add maybe another quality scholarship back to kind of just shore that room out just for depth purposes, more or less, if they can get. If you can hit on another great running back in the portal, absolutely. By all means. But I'm curious to see what pairing out of Jacobs, Henry, and Sanders ends up working the best with Devin. And I actually got an email from a reader this week after literally hours after the spring game. I haven't heard the wide receivers talked about, and I emailed that reader back and I said honestly it's because I think they're in a very good, I think they're in a good spot at that point.
Right.
You do have Isaiah Jones, Syracuse transfer. He's looked solid. Sean Miller, Illinois transfer. He's been pretty impressive in my eyes. Honestly, hasn't flashed a ton, but he's been very, very steady. Luke Weissong is healthy. Evan Weissong has been getting some reps as well, doing some kind of different things. Saw him using a couple of sweeps during practice, and I just haven't written about him and talked about him a ton because it's just not a position of concern to me at this point.
Good silence. It's a good silence.
It's a good, yes. There's nothing to worry about in that regard. Yeah, I mean, for you, just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I mean, overall, going into fall camp and stuff like that, I mean, not expectations wins and losses, but kind of with what we've seen so far, and I know it's early and we haven't seen a ton in some ways, but I mean, what are you most looking to kind of see heading into fall with basically, I mean, we have 2 practices left, 3 practices left, kind of turn the page. What are you looking to see out of fall camp this year?
I think out of fall camp, I think knowing how quickly the switch was flipped when spring ball did start, and hearing from all the players again how meticulous these regimens are, how crazy, very strict everything is, and even seeing week 1 of spring practice to the last week or the spring game, or even the last practice I think we saw just organizational wise, there's been a lot of improvement, right? Of just, okay, they look like a team that's everyone's, communicating right, the coaches, everything's running a little smoother. So I think by fall camp, I think I want to be able to see them as a full cohesive team where things are just I don't even want to use the word militant, but things are going and just rolling. Just kind of more of a confidence there, because I think once you get all of that out, all this change kind of out, then that's when you can really start working on a lot of more specific skills and different things or specific things in the game. When you kind of just move past all of the, first spring ball jitters of a new coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on with that. And it feels long in some ways, but spring ball literally is just 15 practices. It's just 15 days to actually do on-field work and actually kind of expedite things. You can do things off the field, but there's a cap on that in terms of NCAA allotted hours. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Just how much things have kind of settled, and I think that'll be a good. It won't be a good. It's not the best way to get a gauge on how many wins or losses there's going to be. But a good barometer to kind of sense how things would go. For me, I'm just looking to see jersey numbers. That is.
That would be great. Well, how did I forget?
That is one of my things. I'm just looking to see that. Although, I mean, that's more of a sarcastic answer, but it is interesting what they do. I want to write more about the jersey number earning process and all that. But with that being said, Lauren, is there anything else you want to add or get out there about UNM football?
No, I think it's going to be exciting to see. It's always fun seeing a new coach come in, a new era, and I think I'm really excited to see what happens this fall. When you did ask me to come on this podcast, though, I was, you beat me in a 40, and I was kind of I don't know if I should say yes to the guy who beat me on it.
We will do a rematch at some point. We'll do a rematch at some point.
I'll stretch, warm up. I'll bring my spikes. We'll be great.
I think Lauren is the overwhelming betting favorite, and I think I have 0 chance on an actual track. Yeah. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on. For all those who enjoyed this, you can follow Lauren on Twitter, and you can find her work at kob4.com, I believe.
Yeah, perfect.
KOB4. If you want to find more Albuquerque Journal podcasts, you can listen to the Albuquerque Journal Podcast Network on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcast, and you can watch them on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel where you can find episodes of Writer's Block, this show. Prep Central, hosted by James Yotis, and Talking Grammar, hosted by Jeff Grammer. Lauren, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Appreciate you. And thanks to everybody for listening.